Lawyer up, we're going to court. Well, ancient Greek court, but still. Welcome back, friends. It's good to see you. You know, one of the unfortunate parts of being a rhetorician is that you hear people complain all the time about what a cheap, terrible thing rhetoric is. But when you spend time actually learning about rhetoric instead of just labeling things you dislike as rhetoric, then you begin to see that rhetoric is a valuable tool for solving problems that other methods can't. In fact, a lot of our most popular methods for solving problems and answering questions, like the sciences, focus primarily, if not exclusively, on the establishment of facts. Because of that, I think we can get a little facts obsessed when we run into problems. That is, people who disagree often complain that the other side is wrong only because they don't have the facts. If only they had the facts, they say, then they would know that I'm right and that they're awful people. If you pay close attention to disagreements, though, you might see that most of them don't actually revolve around the facts. Instead, they revolve around what those facts mean or what we're meant to do with those facts. Like we've talked about on the show before, it is a scientifically observable fact that water freezes at 32 degrees Fahrenheit. And while some people interpret an outdoor temperature of 32 as a sign that they should wear a coat, other people seem to be just fine going out in shorts and a t-shirt. It's not that the shorts wearer rejects the fact of cold weather, it's just that they interpret that fact differently and respond to it in another way. If we felt like we needed the shorts wearer to put on a coat for some reason, no amount of discussion about the facts would actually change their mind. They're well aware of the facts. They know that it's 32 degrees. They're just comfortable wearing shorts. In order to change their actions, we need to do something other than talk about scientific facts. And I'm sure I'm not surprising anyone when I say that rhetoric is in fact the tool for the job. When the dispute is over facts, science can help. But when the facts have either already been established or can't be established, we need to rely on rhetoric. To see why, I thought it would be fun to look back at a speech written by Lysias that works through the legal proceedings concerning the murder of a man named Eratosthenes. Not only is a little courtroom drama an exciting thing, but it's also a really good illustration of what rhetoric is, how it works, and what it's good for. The speech on the death of Eratosthenes is written by Lysias from the perspective of a man named Euphilitus. Euphilitus stands accused of murdering Eratosthenes because he found Eratosthenes spending time with his wife in a particularly scandalous way. The speech is written to present Euphilitus's case to the Athenian government in order to absolve him of any wrongdoing in the death of Eratosthenes, and in this particular case, there is no dispute about the actual facts. As Euphilitus explains it, he and his wife had a good relationship. He trusted her and wasn't overly controlling. They had a baby, and though it was usually more common for women to sleep upstairs at that time, he didn't want her to risk falling down the stairs in the night to feed the baby, so Euphilitus had taken to sleeping upstairs while his wife slept downstairs. Well, one day, an old lady in town warns Euphilitus that Eratosthenes has a history of luring women into extramarital relationships, and that Euphilitus's wife is the latest of those women. Needless to say, though Euphilitus does say it, he was alarmed to hear the news. Well, long story short, one particular night, Euphilitus had his friend Sostratus over. They had dinner, Sostratus left, and Euphilitus went to bed. Sometime later, another person in the house woke Euphilitus and told him that Eratosthenes was downstairs with Euphilitus's wife. So Euphilitus leaves the house, knocks on the doors of his friends in order to get as many of them as he can to come with him to confront Eratosthenes, and then leads them to his wife's bedroom, where they do, in fact, find Eratosthenes, but not his clothing. So Euphilitus hits Eratosthenes, ties him up, and drags him out of the room. Eratosthenes confesses to adultery and begs Euphilitus not to kill him. Euphilitus responds by saying something grand like, "It is not I who will kill you, but the law of the city," and then ends Eratosthenes' life. In this case, there is no dispute about the actual facts. Eratosthenes was engaged in nocturnal debauchery with Euphilitus's wife. Euphilitus found out, gathered some of his friends, and then killed Eratosthenes in plain view of the gathered witnesses. Nobody's disputing what happened, but there is a dispute, and it's important to recognize before we go any further that that dispute is not about the facts. Everybody can agree about what the facts are, but the actual problem goes beyond the facts. So the actual question in the case of the murder of Eratosthenes is about whether or not Eratosthenes' death was justified according to laws prohibiting adultery, or whether Euphilitus killed him for some other reason. And I think it's important to understand what that means for us. In essence, the main question of this case is this: was Euphilitus motivated to kill Eratosthenes only in order to exact justice under Athenian law? And of course that leads to the ultimate question of whether or not Euphilitus should be punished for killing Eratosthenes. And importantly, the facts cannot answer either of those questions. They can only tell us what happened, but they cannot tell us why it happened. If we want to know what was going on in Euphilitus' head at the time, the facts may give us clues, but they cannot give us definitive proof. So we have a problem. We need to understand the motive in Eratosthenes' death. Euphilitus maintains that it happened in accordance with the legal penalty for adultery, and the other side presumably argues that Euphilitus had some other motive for killing Eratosthenes, like a personal grudge or the potential for monetary gain. And that's not a problem that the facts can solve. In this case, the facts do not and cannot speak for themselves, or if they can, they can't really tell us anything useful. It's not like we can just send somebody out to gather more evidence, because the heart of the dispute, Euphilitus' private motivations, are unknowable to anyone except Euphilitus himself, and he has obvious incentive to characterize himself in a particular way. Forensic science isn't going to close this case, so we need another tool to solve the problem, and of course that's where rhetoric comes in. In defending himself, Euphilitus rehearses the facts of the case and explains how those facts support his claim that the death of Eratosthenes was justified. In other words, he leads his audience through the rhetorical process of interpreting the significance of the facts. For example, in recounting the events of that night, he tries to make it very clear that the death of Eratosthenes was not a premeditated murder. So he says that he had his friend Sostratus over for dinner, and goes on to say that if he did want to murder Eratosthenes anyway and just use adultery as an excuse, he probably wouldn't have invited anyone over that night. If Eratosthenes knew that there were more people in the house, it would have made him less likely to sneak in. So, Euphilitus argues, it wouldn't have made sense to try to lay a trap for Eratosthenes, while at the same time making it less likely that Eratosthenes would walk into the trap. Similarly, Euphilitus explains that he had to go out in the moment to gather some friends to back him up in case there was a fight when he confronted Eratosthenes. However, he points out that some of his friends were out of town, so he only was able to gather a few. If Euphilitus had been planning to kill Eratosthenes all along, he argues that it would seem much more likely that he would have coordinated with his witnesses beforehand, so that they would have all been ready to go instead of forcing him to go out and gather them in the moment that night. And this is important. In each instance, Euphilitus offers interpretations of the facts that are either more or less likely. Whereas we can say with 100% certainty that Eratosthenes was killed by Euphilitus, because he was, we can never say with 100% certainty why Euphilitus killed him. So in defending himself, Euphilitus shows how the most likely interpretations of the facts support his innocence. In this case, the absolute factual truth is essentially unknowable, but we can still make good judgments about what is more or less likely based on the facts. And that process of figuring out what is most probable when absolute truth is inaccessible is exactly what rhetoric is for. We don't need rhetoric where we have certainty, but rhetoric becomes essential when there is uncertainty. Where it is impossible to know for sure what the big T truth is, such as in the case of Euphilitus's private motivations, we can use rhetoric to figure out the most likely and convincing interpretations of the facts. Ultimately, Euphilitus concludes his defense by saying that he never knew Eratosthenes and could have had no motive for killing him other than exacting the legally prescribed punishment for adultery. In other words, Euphilitus says that if he hadn't killed him, he'd be undermining the law. And if the court decided to punish Euphilitus, they would be doing further damage to the law and essentially granting adulterers all over free rein to philander without fear of reprisals. At least so says Euphilitus. There's always room for a counter-argument, and that's exactly the point. When a dispute involves the interpretation and application of facts in the midst of uncertainty, rhetoric is just what the doctor ordered. It would be great if the facts really did speak for themselves and we could settle every dispute by just collecting more information. But that's not the world we live in. People can interpret the same facts in different ways, and those disputes can get pretty messy. When we get snarled up in those kinds of tangles, tools like science can't really help us, and we need to turn to rhetoric to help us make sense of the facts and move on. Now, to be clear, I'm not saying that science is bad. If we want to confirm observable facts, science is probably the very best tool for the job, but we need to be clear-headed about its limitations. Science is also designed to filter out human interpretations, which means it isn't very useful for applying factual knowledge to human society. It can't, in other words, tell us what the facts mean for us. That's a different rhetorical process. For example, science can tell us the mechanics of splitting an atom, but it cannot tell us what to do with that knowledge. For that, we rely on interpretations of facts and debates about their applications. And this is worth talking about because I hear people say all the time that they just want the straight facts. Now, it's good to make sure that we have the facts right, but it's also important to understand that many of our most important debates are not just about the facts. They're about how we want to interpret the facts and what we want to do in response to them. And if we're only looking for facts and we're not paying attention to how other people are interpreting or misinterpreting those facts, we're going to miss what's really going on and leave ourselves vulnerable to manipulation. A good understanding of rhetoric helps us first to understand and apply the facts, but it also attunes us to other interpretations all around us. Then, instead of just squabbling about facts that people generally already agree on, we can focus on understanding and critiquing the interpretations of the facts that are really at the heart of our debates. In other words, if we want to answer the question what, we need facts. But if we want to answer the question so what, we need rhetoric. And in the case of the murder of Eratosthenes, the what wasn't really being debated. The real question was so what? Yes, Euphilitus did kill Eratosthenes, but so what? Did that constitute a crime? And if so, what should be done about it? At their most basic, those are questions that we need rhetoric to answer because the facts just can't do it by themselves. And that's okay. That's exactly why rhetoric exists. We need to acknowledge rhetoric and understand how it helps us to find workable solutions to complex problems. Otherwise, we'll just be at the mercy of people who will inevitably misuse its persuasive powers. Of course, there's so much more to say about the nature and practice of rhetoric. We've only just scratched the surface, so stay tuned for more rhetorical adventures in the near future. In the meantime, though, thanks for watching. Let me know whether you think Euphilitus is justified or whether he's full of ancient Greek garbage, and I'll look forward to our next visit.